This is Bloomberg Businessweek Daily, reporting from the magazine that helps global leaders stay ahead, with insight on the people, companies, and trends shaping today's complex economy, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Businessweek Daily with Carol Massar and Tim Stenovec, live on Bloomberg Radio, television, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals.
And a very good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Bloomberg Businessweek Daily. There is a lot going on this Wednesday, January 7th, 2026. Carol Massar along with Tim Stenovec. We've got stocks hovering near record highs. We're tracking a mixed bag of economic news. We're going to keep a watch, though, as investors are, on kind of the shifts that we are seeing in geopolitics. Venezuela, Tim, certainly front and center. We should also mention we're following a story about an immigration and customs enforcement officer who fatally shot a woman during a confrontation in Minneapolis. So some anger over the presence of ICE agents in that city. That's just one of the things we're watching. And we should mention that Donald Trump, certainly active on social media, and we're watching the housing sector and some of the PE giants and investment giants.
That's just a little bit of what we're watching this afternoon, Carol. We're seeing some of those housing stocks fall. Invitation Homes down, Blackstone down as well, which owns quite a few of these multifamily or single-family homes, rather, in the United States. We're going to bring you updates on that story as they do come through. In the meantime, everything happening in Venezuela is certainly on our radar as well. The U.S. seizing 2 sanctioned oil tankers. The U.S. says it will control Venezuelan oil exports indefinitely. Transactional, national security, the questions, the goal, and what is behind those U.S. actions. Yeah,
we're going to put those to our Joe Doe in just a moment. Plus, what is really, really, really needed to make Venezuela economically viable long term? Is it oil? Is it something else? Is it U.S. involvement? That's another question we want answered.
Also, we're watching everything happening out in Las Vegas at the Consumer Electronics Show. Walmart Executive Vice President in charge of AI acceleration, product, and design is going to be joining us. We'll be hearing from that person in just a few minutes. Also, the CEO of Oshkosh Corporation on autonomy, AI, connectivity, and electrification.
Story on the Bloomberg: humanoid robots pour coffee, fold laundry at CES very slowly.
I had a friend say, send a message this morning. He's like not even involved in the tech world or in business. And he said, did you see those robots? From Boston, he said, from Boston Dynamics.
So the marketing and the PR behind CES is working.
It's working, yeah.
They are cool. They are cool. All right. We've got a lot coming your way in 60 minutes. Do stay with us. But right now, also stay with us as we get an update on the trading day. Here is Charlie Pellet.
Hi, thank you very much. Lots going on. Indeed, as you both say, lots of moving parts of this market. We got you covered because that's what we do best here at Bloomberg. Do want to begin with the housing story. President Trump saying he will move to ban institutional investors from buying single-family homes, all part of a push to address housing affordability. The president announced the step on social media. He did not immediately provide details on what his effort would entail, but said he would ask Congress to codify the action. An immediate response in the stock market. Shares of Blackstone, major player in the industry, it is down by 4.4%. Invitation Home shares down 7.7%. Other home builders selling off. Case in point, Toll Brothers, the luxury home builder, down 1.9%. KB Home down 3.5%. Lennar right now down 2.1%. Pulte Home down by 2.8%. Wall Street trading mixed right now. We got the Dow lower, down 231, drop there of 0.5%. Any close higher today for the S&P will be another record 69.53 where we stand now, up 9. That is a gain of just about 0.1%. Nasdaq Composite Index up 144, higher by 0.6. The 10-year yield 4.13%, with the 2-year currently yielding 3.46%. Gold now down $42 the ounce. Spot gold down 0.9%, 44.52 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude down 1.9%, 56.02 a barrel, and Bitcoin down 2.5%, 90,900 right now on Bitcoin. Energy Secretary Chris Wright says the Trump administration plans to control future sales of oil from Venezuela and use the proceeds to rebuild that nation's economy. Chevron shares down 0.2%, ExxonMobil down 1.6%, ConocoPhillips down 2.2%. Also do want to focus on some of the oil services stocks. Schlumberger, or SLB as it's now known, down 2.4%. Halliburton down 1%. Baker Hughes down by 1.6%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcast. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It is indeed. All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Well, as you know, probably by now, U.S. forces seized 2 more sanctioned oil tankers as part of its energy quarantine of Venezuela, signaling that the Trump administration will ratchet up its pressure campaign days after capturing President Nicolas Maduro. Meantime, the Trump administration plans to control future sales of oil from Venezuela and use the proceeds to rebuild the nation's beleaguered economy, so it says. And that did specifically come from U.S. Energy Secretary Chris Wright earlier today at the Goldman Sachs Energy, Cleantech, and Utilities Conference in Miami.
We're going to let the market, let the oil flow, sell that market to United States refineries and to around the world to bring better oil supplies, but have those sales done by the U.S. government and deposited into accounts controlled by the U.S. government. And then from there, those funds can flow back into Venezuela to benefit the Venezuelan people. But we need to have that leverage and that control of those oil sales to drive the changes that simply must happen in Venezuela.
All right, that, of course, U.S. Energy Secretary Chris Wright earlier today at that Goldman Sachs conference in Miami. With more on what's going on, what some say, I will say, not necessarily our next guest, feels transactional. We turn to Bloomberg News corporate and economic Statecraft senior reporter Joe Deaux right here in studio. The seizing of the sanctioned oil tankers, the U.S. energy quarantine of Venezuela, that along with the U.S. planning to control future sales of oil from the country and then taking in the money and splitting it between the U.S. and Venezuela. What is that about? What is the kind of end goal here?
So
who benefits by all of this?
It's unclear. You have an extraordinary action taken by the United States of America as a direction by President Donald Trump to remove President Maduro from Venezuela, quite literally, remove him, which in normal times would seemingly leave some sort of a vacuum, but we did quickly see the vice president step in and take over.
A friend to the oil industry, as we know.
Right. And the question has been, what do we do with the oil? What do we do with the natural resources? The real question is, what about the oil, right? And we've seen all the actions that you saw play out. What we've seen in the 4 or 5 days since is a lot of, here are the ideas that we have over how we're going to handle the infrastructure of the oil. And we've been talking to oil majors like ConocoPhillips and Exxon and Chevron, but it's a lot of talk. It's not a lot of clear action.
How does it typically work when it comes to natural resources? You've spent years covering metals and mining, for example. How does a split typically work when it comes to natural resources when a company that is maybe from another country goes and extracts those natural resources from a different country?
There's all sorts of different things. There's like, you have taxes. So like, okay, you have to pay a certain amount of tax, like nickel in Indonesia, for example. Years ago, it used to be the Chinese would just extract nickel out of Indonesia, bring it back to China and process it. The government got smart, call it 12 years ago, and said, okay, well, the value add is the processing. So you can continue to extract, but you also have to process within the nation. And so there are certain fees or taxes that go along with that so that the state can actually say to its taxpayers, to its citizens, we are making money off of this as well, even though it is an extractive industry. Thinking of it this way is a fair way to think of how different nations work with foreign corporations that are in big extractive industries.
Well, let me ask the question in a more extreme way then, because I think there would be some people who perhaps are watching or listening right now saying, okay, well, if this is if this oil is in Venezuela, it belongs to Venezuela and its people. What right does the United States have to take that oil?
Right. I think there are a lot of fair legal, philosophical arguments that are probably ahead of us. I think that's a really important thing to point out. Like, this is uncharted territory. And while it seems like a plan is being developed by the United States and by Venezuela and by others, it is not clear what that plan is. Obviously, we hear the energy secretary saying today, well, it's going to be split and it's going to go into U.S. accounts, and we'll kind of oversee those accounts and make sure the money gets to who rightly has should be getting that money, but like, how are they going to execute that?
So that $2.8 billion at current market price of the 30 to 50 million barrels of oil from Venezuela to the U.S., we're not saying like half of it goes to the U.S. government. I mean, doesn't Chevron own it, or who gets that money?
Chevron,
because it sounds, that's where I think people are saying, is this transactional?
Right. Chevron is the only oil major actively operating in Venezuela right now.
Correct.
The reporting that we had today was that there are talks to try to get ConocoPhillips and Exxon back into the country to also help develop the oil deposits. They're talking about everything from developing to infrastructure. I mean, we have quoted one of the Rice University professors who says, to do this, we're talking like $10 billion a year that has to be spent to build this out. And then your question is, but okay, say it happens. Who's getting the money? Well, it's hard to understand. If the energy secretary is saying it's going to be split, there are obvious questions in the market that you are asking right now. How does it get split? What do those accounts look like? Who actually controls them? Like, the question I have is, the United States president currently has a golden share over United States Steel. He has shown that he will, on certain things, have direct say, one individual. And so does he said, I will take these accounts. So will he? I don't know.
I want to, roll into this Greenland, because we did have the president talking about that. European leaders issuing a joint statement warning that President Trump needs to respect the territorial integrity of Greenland and Denmark. I do wonder, it almost feels like, is this kind of like the British Empire that the U.S. is looking to be in terms of natural resources? Or is that the wrong read on it? Like, how do you see it? Like, again, and I go back to, is this transactional? The president wants one thing, gonna get it, and then back off.
Here's my read on Greenland. Greenland is part of the Western Hemisphere in our national security strategy. Venezuela is part of the Western Hemisphere in our national security strategy. Questions came up to the president over the weekend. If you're doing this with Venezuela, what about other things? And the president mentions Greenland. Greenland has not been discussed by the president of the United States since the summer.
Right.
It was striking that he brought up Greenland, and we've seen all the news that's come out. The Danish officials who have said, whoa, whoa, whoa. The points that, hey, if the United States launched an attack on Greenland, that would effectively end NATO. I think we need to pump our brakes for a second, see what plays out. We do know that the president of the United States sometimes is a little bit loose with his words. But behind his words, there is some meaning. And I think the market's trying to find out, what is that meaning? I think European officials are trying to figure out, what is that meaning? And I do bring it back to connecting the dots. The president is not telling us directly why he's talking about Greenland. But there is a connection of, this is part of the Western Hemisphere. And he just had, in his mind, a massive victory of extracting the president of Venezuela and apprehending him, bringing him back to the United States. So on some level, don't forget, Greenland has always been a priority for President Donald Trump. It's just that lately, it hasn't been at the top of the pile.
It's just fascinating. And I just want to say, the news fast and furious. We do have a headline crossing. President Trump will not allow dividends, buybacks for defense companies. Oh. So an interesting development there as well. And I'm just looking at Lockheed Martin, for example. It just dropped about 1% here. So the defense sector now also on our radar. Joe, thank you so much. I know we'll be coming back to you because this story certainly continues. Bloomberg News corporate and economic Statecraft senior reporter Joe Deaux. Tim, we're going to stay on Venezuela.
Yeah, and what's needed to make this country viable, if that's the goal of all this U.S. action? For that, we welcome Francisco Rodriguez, senior research fellow at the Center for Economic and Policy Statecraft at the University of Denver's Joseph Corbell School of International Studies. He joins us from Denver. Professor, good to have you on the program. You write in Foreign Affairs about Venezuela after Maduro. The current government, it's still the former government of President Nicolas Maduro. The acting president is Delcy Rodriguez, his vice president. Is this current government, is this current setup good for Venezuela and its people?
Well, the question is, what's the alternative, and what was the U.S. willing or able to do? What we saw over the weekend was the extraction of Nicolas Maduro, but not a regime change. The regime remains in place. What would have been necessary to change the regime? That would have been a very different operation. The U.S. would have had to carry out a land invasion in Venezuela. It would have had to occupy the country. It would have needed to get involved in state building, and the U.S. clearly decided not to do that. So then it has to deal with the authorities that actually have control over the territory. What the U.S. is trying to do is to say, well, to those authorities, what you're going to do is going to be circumscribed by the pressure that we're putting on you. We'll allow you to sell your oil under certain conditions, but you have to comply with what we're asking you to do. For example, you can't sell the oil to China. You have to sell it to the U.S. or you have to transfer it to the U.S. in some way.
Professor, is it notable to you that there aren't necessarily humanitarian elements that are tied to this? That's something in the past that we've heard about nation building, the idea of democracy, the idea of human rights, those sorts of things. We don't necessarily see that.
There's humanitarian and democracy. I mean, there's one problem in Venezuela is that this country has undergone a massive economic collapse. It suffered a contraction of 71% of its GDP, the largest ever peacetime economic contraction in world history. And this country has been under a blockade of oil exports by the U.S., a total blockade, for approximately 1 month. And this country depends only on oil revenue. That's its only source of revenue to fund its economy. So we could be looking at a situation in which the economy suffers another major humanitarian crisis, another major economic crisis, and we have migration outflows, we have food shortages, we have quite possibly a famine. Then there's another issue, which is the issue of human rights and democracy. The U.S. government has not talked about human rights. It hasn't talked about democracy. Secretary Rubio said on very vague terms, well, after we stabilize the economy, there's going to be a transition that's going to be done by the Venezuelan people. But this is very vague. I mean, there was an election. It was won by the opposition last year.
Right.
But that doesn't seem to be part of the plans of the U.S. government to bring this into the picture.
Yeah, I guess I just do wonder, is energy, a focus on energy, really the path forward to creating a sustainable economy in Venezuela longer term?
Well, I think that right now you have to worry about the short term more than the long term. I mean, so the Venezuelan economy.
So is oil the answer short term? Because we've all talked about the infrastructure.
It has to be. The Venezuelan economy has more than 90% of its exports have been oil for the last 110 years. You're not going to transform this overnight. This country is in the midst of a massive humanitarian crisis. What you have to do is recover the economy with the anchor of that economy, which is oil. Venezuela used to produce 2.5 million barrels. I'm not talking about ages ago. I'm talking about 2015. Before sanctions were imposed, it was producing 2.5 million barrels. Now it's producing around 900,000 barrels. That is the driver of the Venezuelan economy. You have to increase that oil production, and that has to generate royalties and revenues for the Venezuelan state so that it can fund public spending, so that it can fund imports of basics. This is a country that does not produce enough food to feed itself. It buys that food with the revenues from oil exports. So those oil exports have to be directed primarily at making sure that Venezuelans' basic needs are met.
Francisco, we've only got about a minute left, unfortunately. I mean, what actions by the U.S. will actually help the company? Do you agree with what they've done so far? Is big steps forward and will put the country on the right path to economic viability?
Well, we're not sure what they've done right now. I mean, we know that they invaded the country and took out the president, but we're not sure what it is that they're doing in terms of this oil deal. The only point is that I want to make is that this money has to come back to Venezuela. This money has to be able to fund the functioning of the Venezuelan economy. Otherwise, you're going to have a massive humanitarian crisis. And what's going to happen is that millions of more Venezuelans are going to show up in other countries and ultimately in U.S. borders unless you stabilize the Venezuelan economy.
All right, we got to leave it there. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Francisco Rodriguez, Senior Research Fellow at the Center for Economic and Policy Research at the University of Denver's School of International Studies. Hey, as we head to a break, reacting to something that President Trump put out on social, saying that he will not permit dividends or stock buybacks for defense companies. RTX down about 0.6%. Northrop Grumman 2.5% lower. Same story for Lockheed Martin. General Dynamics down almost 2%.
It's 2:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. The Dow and now the S&P both in the red. NASDAQ pushing higher. S&P pulling back from a record now, down just about 1.6943, down under 0.1%. The Dow down 0.6. We've got NASDAQ lower, higher by 0.5%, with a 10-year currently yielding 4.13%. Gold down $46 the ounce to $44.48, down 1%. West Texas Intermediate crude down 1.9%. 56.02 a barrel, and Bitcoin now down 2.6%, 90,747 on Bitcoin. Warner Brothers Discovery has determined that an amended takeover offer from Paramount Skydance is inferior to the deal it already has in place with Netflix. It's urging its shareholders not to tender their shares. Warner Brothers Discovery up now by 0.2%. President Trump says he will move to ban institutional investors from buying single-family homes. Shares of Blackstone, they are trading lower now, down by just about 4.6%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcast. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. All right, we'll get back to Charlie. A lot of movement based on strategy and policies and social tweets, if you will,
I want to know what
from the
prompted
president.
the president to send that post, not just about
Which one, housing or just
both,
also defense
the housing,
stocks?
but also the defense stocks. Like, was there something that prompted him to do that?
It's a great question. And as you said, in terms of the defense stocks, and the president saying he won't allow dividends, buybacks, but he's also talking about not allowing excessive compensation for leaders. And you can see that the group RTX now back off its lows of the session, but we're still looking at a 2% decline on Northrop Grumman, Lockheed down almost 2%, and General Dynamics also lower in today's session.
Well, CES 2026 back in Las Vegas. Our Bloomberg Tech team out in full force, speaking with the event's biggest newsmakers: NVIDIA's Jensen Huang, Qualcomm's Cristiano Amon, and AMD's Lisa Su, to name just a few. The dynamic duo of Caroline Hyde and Ed Ludlow standing by now with Walmart's Executive Vice President of AI Acceleration, Product and Design, Daniel Danker. Ed, Caroline, good afternoon.
Yeah, good afternoon. And it is AI everywhere, AI everything, and that definitely applies to the world's largest retailer. As you said, Daniel Danker, Executive Vice President in charge of AI acceleration, design and product. And come January 31st, Walmart will go through a change that's been well told. Doug McMillon will step down as CEO. But actually, the way that the company communicated it is a bit of a transition in the AI context as well. You're going to be very busy from this point on.
I'm looking forward to it. You know, we've always said that we're people-led and tech-powered, and I think that AI presents this incredible opportunity to rethink so many parts of what we do and how we do it. It will affect everything from how we serve customers, how we build a closer connection with customers using technology, both in store and online, but also every step of what leads up to serving customers, the supply chain, inventory, how we choose products and how we bring them to customers. So I think it's very, very exciting.
It is exciting. We're on this cusp of AI agents, agentic AI. How is that feeding into what I can imagine it's customer service first and foremost?
The consumer or customer-facing bit, right?
Yeah, but where else are we going to see it feed in?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned customer service, because that is where the first experiences in our Sparky shopping agent kind of came to life. Customers first started by saying, where's my order? If I have an issue, how do I get a refund? Things like that. But that was just the beginning. And now,
was it a genuine agent, though, or was it just a generative tool?
It was absolutely an agent, and it's able to take action on your behalf and truly help you out. But now we're going to see it emerge into solving many more of the things that customers really want when it comes to shopping. So, for example, today people spend a lot of time reordering the same things that they buy every single week. Well, now Sparky's just going to take care of that for you. It will get to know you and understand that you're planning a camping trip, right, or you have a barbecue coming up, or any of these kind of scenarios that today rely a lot on scrolling through lists, where customers have just become accustomed to scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, and all of a sudden you'll just be able to very naturally tell us what it is that you're looking for, and Sparky will bring it directly to you. And I think that's going to change how people engage with their mobile experiences, but it's also going to make its way directly into the store, where a lot of those journeys things will make shopping in-store and online better. So I no longer refer to it as online. I refer to it as digital, because the digital experience online and in-store will get much, much more exciting.
There is a direct mechanism for that as well, which is the integration of Walmart through ChatGPT. It launched in the fall. Give me some data points on adoption, the size of the user base currently. But I guess for Walmart, the one metric that I'm sure that you monitor is fulfillment. How many people engage with Walmart through ChatGPT and finalize a transaction?
Yeah, well, we rolled out our partnership with ChatGPT just before Black Friday. So it was really good timing to see what happens when we don't just serve customers when they come directly to us, but also when we come to customers where they are. And many of these journeys actually don't begin as commerce journeys. They don't necessarily start with shopping in mind. You know, when you say, I need to get a wine stain out of a rug, you're not necessarily thinking about buying something. So a lot of those kinds of conversations would begin on a ChatGPT type interface, but then they lead into a commerce experience. And our goal is to be where customers are, but also to serve those moments that didn't necessarily begin with shopping, but they end up with shopping.
Is it working so far?
Well, it's very early days. I mean, the vast majority of our customers come to us through the channels that they've always come to us from, but we're starting to see an emerging behavior there. And what excites me is that it isn't just like the behaviors we've always seen. It's enabling us to reach customers in moments that they didn't use to come to us for. And that's very exciting for us. But it's still very early days, so too early to say.
I mean, Daniel, I think it's worth reflecting for our audience what the actual technology is that you've built or that you've gone to other people for, because the big elephant in the room is Amazon, which is a very vertically integrated company, and also in commerce and in AI. How are you thinking about owning your AI stack or turning to others?
We believe that we need to build technology that will transform shopping experiences starting all the way from the very top of the supply chain. So not only are we building the technology that creates consumer-facing experiences inside of our app, we also build the technology that starts upstream of that as well. So I'll give you an example. In our supply chain, not only are we loading trucks with pallets that reach the store to replenish shelves, but we're using AI to very intentionally load those pallets in exactly the right order so that when those items come off the truck, they go straight to the shelf, and that the plan of how they'll get replenished in the store started in the distribution center. And that's an example of how we build technology that not only enables us to reach customers through our digital products, but actually makes our in-store experience better, because shelves are stocked with the right products at the right time for the right customers. And that's a thought process that began miles upstream of the store. So we're using AI technology in that way as well. And that's why this is a really end-to-end story for us.
There's a very clear distinction between how Walmart interacts with its customers through AI and how it uses AI internally. That is your job as well, right? You split your time between the West Coast and Bentonville, and the West Coast is where the talent is. Actually, that's probably my biggest question for you is, what happens next in hiring? How competitive do you feel your team is from an engineering talent perspective?
Yeah, well, I mean, we actually run a larger technology organization than many tech companies. So we are every bit, when we say we're people-led and tech-powered, you really see it in the talent that we have on the team. And that extends all the way to our product and engineering and design and data science teams, which are every bit as sophisticated as the most sophisticated technology companies out there. But what's cool is that what we offer to technologists working at Walmart is actually quite unique, because they get to walk the stores, they get to affect what happens in the distribution centers. It's a physical job as much as it is a technical job. That's what attracted me to it, and I think it's what attracts a lot of our engineers to this place.
Well, how many humanoid robots are going to be walking your stores? Where are you seeing that? When we're at CES, and everywhere you turn, there's a humanoid robot.
It's a good question. Like, is it genuinely part of your plan?
When we say we are people-led and tech-powered, what we want to do is help the people, the associates in our stores and clubs, serve customers the very best way possible. And in fact, one of the most exciting ways that we're using agentic AI is actually through the apps that our own associates are using when they serve customers. So if you imagine in the past, when a customer would ask an associate a question, the associate only had so much information to work with to help the customer. Now the associates all have an AI, agentic AI interface that they use on their devices that has incredible amount of access to knowing what's in the store, but also what's being replenished at what rate, et cetera. So our mentality is, how do we use AI and technology to help our associates serve customers
robots?
better? We're people-led tech power.
But will there be? There obviously must be robotics that's going into the fulfillment centers and in the manufacturing.
Right.
Will they come in? We're already seeing them stocking shelves. Is that
Right.
something that you think will work, or are we just way too early for that? We're hearing such mixed
I think
messages.
it's far too early to go there, and I think it's much more interesting and much more practical to think about the ways that we can use technology to help our associates with our customers. Our customers love our associates. They often build personal connections.
Yeah.
We view that as an asset and a differentiator. And we've always, it's kind of comes in the history of the company, has always been about our associates and the connection they create with customers. And AI and technology just enables them to do it better.
This is the question facing every technology company, big or small. Was the investment and the experiment worth it? Has it paid off so far? You're a part of the management and leadership team, right? How much pressure is on you to say, here is a quantifiable piece of evidence of operational cost saving, boost to profit, things like that, because of the work you'd already done in AI?
Well, 2025 was a year where a lot of people experimented with AI. No one was really sure where it was going to work, where it wasn't going to work. 2026 is the year where we're going to start seeing real impact from it. And the impact that excites me most is the growth opportunity that it creates. Because it enables us to understand customers better than we've ever understood them before, we can serve them more products at the right time with great prices and great speed. That's the ethos of the company. But now we're starting to see AI enable a better shopping experience, which means more frequent shopping moments, more scenarios served for customers. But we're also seeing impact in our supply chain. It's enabling us to identify the products that customers are going to need, when they're going to need them, and get those products to the shelves better and faster than we've been able to do before. So it is real impact, and it's very practical at Walmart, which gets me very excited.
We've got 30 seconds. What's the one coolest thing that you've seen here?
I've seen a lot, but I did just walk by what I think was the largest tractor I've ever seen. And it just a reminder of how technology isn't just changing the things that we see, but things that are happening miles before they reach us. This thing was the size of a small city. So.
Well, it's getting the food to our tables and into your stores. We really appreciate it. Daniel Danker, what a joy to have you here. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks for having
Of course, of Walmart leading all things when it comes to AI and innovation. Back to you in the studio.
All right, loving the coverage. Caroline Hyde and Ed Ludlow there at CES, in Las Vegas. And we're going to actually go back there in just a moment.
Hey, we also want to bring you the latest on what the president has been saying about these defense contractors. The president saying that the defense contractors are currently issuing massive dividends to their shareholders and massive stock buybacks at the expense and detriment of investing in plants and equipment. This situation will no longer be tolerated. Carol, it's a long post on social media, but he says in all caps, military equipment is not being made fast enough.
Yep, and
that seems to be what is bothering him.
And he also says until they do so, no executive should be allowed to make in excess of $5 million. So putting some terms, I got to say, look at some of the defense companies. They're off their lows, but we are seeing many of them trending lower in today's session.
It's 2:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We begin with a developing story out of Minneapolis, where an immigration and customs enforcement officer fatally shot a woman during a confrontation, sparking anger from local officials over the presence of ICE agents in the city. Now, according to a spokeswoman for the Department of Homeland Security, the woman allegedly drove her vehicle toward officers. The spokeswoman described the incident as, quote, an act of domestic terrorism. Keeping an eye on defense stocks at this hour. Lockheed Martin and other defense names lower after President Trump said he would not permit dividends or stock buybacks for defense companies until problems are rectified, including pay, production of equipment, and plants. Among those defense names, Lockheed Martin down now by 1.5%. Northrop Grumman is tumbling 2.8%. General Dynamics trading lower now by just about 2%. It is now a down day for the S&P 500 index, has been fluctuating for the past hour or so. Right now we've got the S&P lower by half a point, little changed, retreating from a record, 69.44 the record there. Any close higher today will be another record on the S&P. The Dow down 293, drop there of 0.6%. NASDAQ higher, NASDAQ Composite Index up 0.5%. The 10-year at 4.13% with the 2-year currently yielding 3.46%. Spot gold down $39 the ounce, down 0.9%, 44.53 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude 56.19. WTI lower now by 1.6%. Briefly, Bitcoin down 2.4%, 90,971 on Bitcoin. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcast. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, appreciate the update. Well, at CES, we want to go back there because over at booth 4418 is Oshkosh. It is the machinery company, maker of purpose-built vehicles, equipment, and services.
By the way, not so easy to find those booths at CES. You and I have both been there many years ago.
Because it's massive. Oh. It's massive.
Sorry, go ahead, Carol.
I know. That's when you want to count your steps. Hey, they make towing and recovery vehicles, aviation ground support and gate equipment. So you see them at airports, fire apparatus, boom lifts, telematics for vehicles, AI, augmented reality, so much more. To be fair, Tim, we're just scratching the surface here.
John Pfeifer is the CEO of Oshkosh Corporation. It's a $9 billion market cap company. It's already up about 14% so far this year. The stock gaining 32% last year. It hit a 52-week high. Actually, today, John, good to have you on the program. We've got a lot to talk to you about, so we want to just jump right in. The president, just in the last half hour or so, weighing in on social media on dividends, buybacks, CEO salaries at defense companies, also saying institutional investors can't buy homes in the U.S. In your view, the president getting involved in day-to-day matters for companies, is the president overstepping here?
Well, I'm not going to make a comment on that. I just heard this news, just like you just heard this news. So it's been, haven't fully processed it yet. But I'll just let you know that a minority of the revenue for Oshkosh Corporation comes through the defense business that we have. In fact, it's about 10% of our revenue. Mm-hmm. So I really don't know that this even applies to us. But we'll have to digest it and process it and see what it means. But we're mostly, 90% of our business is serving commercial markets. You talked about it in your intro. Our equipment is all over communities where we all live and work. It's critical equipment that communities where we all live and work can't operate without what we do. And that's really the nature of our company, is all these commercial segments that are so important to us all and how we serve those segments.
Hey, I just want to ask you one more question, then we'll move on. But in terms of the president, having a president who is not bashful, John, about talking about different industries and doing certain things, does it make it maybe tricky for a CEO?
Well, I think in today's world, we have to be very agile and very nimble. And that's what we're focused on, So as we went through 2025, we saw an environment where we had a lot of geopolitical changes. And what I mean is we saw a lot of tariff environments happen, not only by the United States, but around the world. And so we're a global company, of course. Most of what we sell in the U.S. is made in the U.S. We're a quintessential American manufacturer with plants all over the U.S., but we're still a global company with global supply chains. And so we went about being nimble and got a lot of engineers and a lot of our supply chain professionals on tariff engineering work to make sure that we were trying to keep pace with the current environment of where we are geopolitically and with tariffs. We've had a lot of success doing that. We still have a little bit more work to do as we go into 2026. Mm-hmm. But I think it's just an environment where you have to be very nimble and pay attention to what's going on around you and be able to adapt to it. And that's what we do our best trying to make happen.
What work do you still have to do to mitigate the effects of tariffs?
Well, when you look at our product, it's very sophisticated product. There's a lot of technology on our product, and it's very highly engineered product. So when we look at the tariff environment and we have to say, move supply from one country to another, or even some things when we can reshore it, we can reshore it. But these are sophisticated components and materials. So it's not just a simple matter of moving a purchase order from one supplier to another. There's a lot of engineering and validation that goes into play, so it takes a concerted amount of time by our supply chain people and our engineers to make it happen. So it's still more of that what I call tariff engineering work that we're continuing to do, and we're having a lot of success with it.
Can you talk a little bit about the new U.S. Postal Service delivery vehicle? Because about a little over a year ago, that Reuters reported that the transition team was actually looking to cancel part of that contract, the part that has to do with EVs. And I'm wondering, what's the latest between you, your firm, and the White House with regard to how that contract will be fulfilled?
Oh, yeah. All systems go on this product. It's in production. It's in almost every state in the United States today, delivering mail. We've got millions and millions of miles delivered already on these vehicles. The Postal Service absolutely loves it. The vehicle is the best last mile delivery vehicle ever produced. We produce them both in internal combustion propulsion systems or battery electric propulsion systems.
Right.
It depends on what the Postal Service wants in a specific
How has that
market.
How has that mix changed during the Trump administration?
It's not changed at all, and it's not changed at all. It's still the same.
So they did, go ahead.
Essentially, what we've seen, the administration has said, hey, it's up to the Postal Service to decide what they want, if they want battery electric or if they want internal combustion. But we have seen no change in mix of orders from the United States.
What is that mix? I'm just curious.
It's about today it's about 70% battery electric and about 30% internal combustion.
Interesting. All right. So certainly a commitment when it comes to those vehicles.
Are the issues resolved with the initial production ramp? Like, are you at a full production rate today?
Hey, we're at or ahead of what the Postal Service's requirements are. Now we're working with we work really closely with the Postal Service. We'll continue to produce more and more vehicles as we go forward and as their needs continue to develop. But we're at or ahead of the Postal Service's requirements for deliveries. But you'll see us continue to get more units out the door as we go forward. But hey, it's full steam ahead with that program, and it's a great vehicle. If you Google it, NGDV, you'll see a lot of even postal carriers uploading videos of how much improvement this has given them in terms of how they do their work.
It is a pretty cool vehicle, and hopefully we can put some pictures out there on social or up for our listeners and viewers. Hey, one thing I want to ask you, John, you guys are at CES. This is the land of, innovation, disruption, if you will. I'm curious, in your portfolio, which products are furthest along on the path to full autonomy? It feels like that's what we are constantly talking about, and which are expected to be commercialized first. We have about a minute or so.
Yeah, so by the way, we already put a lot of moments of autonomy into many of our end markets, whether it's construction equipment with JLG or it's in our airport markets or in the environmental services markets like refuse and recycling, a lot of moments of autonomy. Now you'll continue to see full autonomy probably start to come into play maybe in the airport markets first. If you come to our booth here at CES, you see autonomous vehicles all over the place, and it's applicable to last mile delivery as it is to environmental services, as it is to airports. But we'll take you through. If you have the chance to see our booth, we'll show you what the airport of the future looks like.
Right.
And there's autonomous vehicles all over it. Instead of having a wing walker, you've got an autonomous vehicle doing the wing walking to bring airports in and out, or an autonomous vehicle pushing jets back from the gate.
John, we got to run. Come back soon.
This is Bloomberg Businessweek Daily with Carol Massar and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
All right, everybody, back here on Bloomberg Businessweek Daily. Carol Massar, Tim Stenovec. Just want to update you on a story. An immigration and customs enforcement officer fatally shot a woman during a confrontation in Minneapolis. This is sparking anger from local officials over the presence of ICE agents in the city. We've seen ICE agents in various cities across the United States. The woman allegedly drove her vehicle toward officers. Again, according to a spokeswoman for the Department of Homeland Security, who described the incident as, quote, an act of domestic terrorism. So it's a story certainly we are following. Be sure to check out the latest on the Bloomberg terminal and at Bloomberg.com.
I do want to add that the Minneapolis mayor called for ICE agents to leave the city immediately, demanding that they get out and, quote, called the DHS's claim of self-defense a, quote, garbage narrative.
All right, so something we're certainly tracking. Hey, also tracking as we get ready to move into the last hour of trading on Wall Street, markets which have been for most of the day a little bit higher and hovering near records. We now see the S&P 500, call it flat, down fractionally. Dow Jones Industrial Average, a decline of 294 points, down 0.6%. NASDAQ 100 holding on to a slight gain just off its highs of the session, still up, Tim, about 94 points, a gain of about 0.4 percentage point.
I'm Tim Stenovec, along with Carol Massar. Let's take a look at some stocks on the move today. With us is Bloomberg News cross-asset reporter Emily Graffeo. Emily, a lot to choose from.
Yeah, there was a lot to choose from. Let's start with MicroStrategy, now named Strategy, ticker MSTR. This is a Bitcoin holding company, and it's up about 2% right now. Its pairing gains, though, was up almost 8% earlier in the day, and it's all on this news that MSCI, one of the largest index providers, decided to keep digital asset treasury companies in its stock indexes.
It's a big deal, right?
Yes. So back in October, they had proposed excluding digital asset treasury companies from the indexes. And the reason why people care is because if a company's in an index, like trillions of dollars of index funds buy it, so it weighs on the stock a lot. If it's not in the index, late yesterday, they said they're maintaining index treatment for digital asset treasuries, which includes Strategy for now. They also said that they're going to be launching a broader consultation on how non-operating companies should be treated. So there's something to do with, if the company just holds a lot of assets on its on its balance sheet and doesn't have like an actual business, what does that mean? But for now, the company is in and the stock is up.
I feel like there's been back and forth on this one for a while, right? We've definitely seen its fortunes a little bit different as of late.
And not just MSCI, there's been a lot of talk, are they going to get added to the S&P 500? What would that mean? But again, they're a crypto company, and so the stock
is... They buy Bitcoin. It's a leveraged bet on Bitcoin.
Yes, and the stock moves a lot in tandem with Bitcoin. So it's down about 60% in the last year. Actually,
okay, what else are you looking at today?
So I'm also looking at shares of Blackstone. This is an interesting one. The stock was down as much as 9% today, now down about 4%. Donald Trump saying that he would move to ban institutional investors from buying single-family homes. So that you can see in the stock chart that weighed on shares of Blackstone. Now the stock has trimmed some losses. And we're also looking at some home builders down as well. Blackstone, notorious for being a major investor in residential real estate. In 2021, they bought Home Partners of America in a $6 billion deal. It was interesting, though. Neil Dutta from Renaissance Macro had a note out. He said institutional investors represent a very small share of sales, just 2%. And bigger investors buy other retail or buy other homes.
To Mike McKee, who earlier today sent me a long note from the American Enterprise Institute that had done research on this, and perhaps this was what Neil was referring to. But the research, they argue at the American Enterprise Institute, doesn't support the narrative that institutional ownership of homes drives up home prices.
Right. But nevertheless, look at how the stock reacted. We saw this Truth Social post from Trump, and I mean, the stock fell 9%. So
it's fascinating because I think after the great financial crisis, right, and there were so much excess homes that were out there, and people were like doing things like maybe we should blow them up, maybe we should let immigrants buy them, like do different things to get rid of that excess supply. And then Blackstone started buying up those properties.
Turned out it was a really good
rental,
bet.
and it was a smart bet. But that was my question too. It's like, how much are they really buying up in terms of the supply that are out there?
Yeah, I feel like this is like a meme on financial Twitter. You see a lot of people constantly talking about the housing crisis, and then Blackstone always comes
politically, it's a very populist thing to do.
Yeah, it sounds good. I've actually had family members when we talk about politics, and they're like, well, it's all the institutional investors who own homes. And I'm like, I'm not so sure.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about another thing that has come out of the president today. He has been talking about the defense companies.
Right. So Lockheed Martin, this is ticker LMT. It's down about 2%. Trump coming out today saying he will not permit dividends or stock buybacks for defense companies until problems are rectified, including pay, production of equipment, and plants. So back in December, he had kind of signaled this desire to meet with defense contractor execs and tell them to spend more on weapons development and not stock buybacks. So we're seeing some of that action come to light today. And yeah, the stock down about 2%.
Yeah, I've seen a few names right moving on that. Hey, Emily, thank you.
Actually, 3% now. It's moved even more.
See, latest, up to date.
Myself.
Courtesy of the
This
Bloomberg.
is real time.
Emily Graffeo, thank you so much.